Hello, I'm Jada Britton, and today I will be discussing the Barnes Foundation as a case study based on the documentary of the artist Steele. In depth, I will be analyzing public versus private interest and the cost and control in the Philadelphia art community. First, a brief overview of the Barnes Foundation. The founder, Dr. Albert C. Barnes, was an American chemist, businessman, and art collector who received a charter from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which established the Barnes Foundation as a cultural, educational institution. From Dr. Barnes, he quoted, the foundation was meant to promote the advancement in education and the appreciation of the fine arts, which is shown by it being a teaching institution that had a gallery, not vice versa. Barnes wanted the collection to educate artists, blue-collar workers, and the common man as he remembered his own roots growing up in poverty. Dr. Barnes wished his collection would be housed in an educational institution, not a public museum. In the documentary, The Artist Steele, he wanted the collection to be used for a hands-on learning experience with unique curriculum for art appreciation. Anyone could enroll to be a student. No education was required. Workers in the factories were allowed to participate in the seminars as he valued that art was for everyone. He considered the Philadelphia art establishment lackluster as he chose contemporary artists such as Picasso and Matisse that Philadelphia creators did not see the significance in. To him, the art establishment acted as a gatekeeper for the way it makes people look and think about art. Overall, Barnes and the Philadelphia elite had a mutual distaste for each other in the art community. After Barnes' death, the foundation faced financial difficulties and pressures from the government and other entities to move the amassed collection to Philadelphia. Before I go more into depth about the misfortunes that occurred to the Barnes Foundation, I will give an overview of the strict donor intent from Dr. Barnes. Later on, I will discuss the importance of Barnes bylaws in relation to the fiduciary duties for a nonprofit and if the donor intent was honored. The three from the overall list are as followed. Number 1, the gallery was to be open 5 days a week, but solely and exclusively for educational purposes, to students and instructors to conduct courses in art and art appreciation. Number 2, Barnes wished that his art, however specifically arranged at the time of death, all paintings shall remain in exactly the places they are of the time of death. Finally, number 3 states the collection would be closed at Barnes' death and no further purchases, bequests, or additions would be allowed, and the gallery not to be used for exhibition of paintings not already property of Barnes, basically meaning he was banning travel expedition. Finally, the documentary The Artist Steele details themes of legacy against power. It argues that a coalition of political figures, philanthropic organization, and art institutions orchestrated a campaign to override Barnes' will, culminating in the collection's move in 2012. Now on to fiduciary duty and governance for a nonprofit, specifically for the Barnes Foundation. The duties that the board failed to follow were duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. To go into more detail, I'll start with duty of care. The duty of care is the responsibility to inform oneself as completely as possible to exercise sound judgments that protect a beneficiary's interests. The Board of Trustees failed to explore other options that align with Barnes' original intent, such as major fundraising campaigns. The documentary stated that if they tried, especially with the level of prestige that the organization has, it could have raised more money. The next part is duty of loyalty, the acting in the best interest of the beneficiary at all times, putting their well-being first and foremost, which, prior to the relocation and the reconstruction, there were several key players involved in the downfall. The biggest one was the president of the Barnes Foundation, Richard Glanton, allowed for the artworks to be sent on a world tour in the 1990s, disregarding the will of Barnes. Glanton's plan for the estimated $16 to $20 million that was received after the world tour would be used for building repairs rather than looking to help the long-term financial plans for the collection. The renovations ran over budget as it wasn't accounted for, and the money also went to paying off legal battles Glanton accumulated during his time as president. One of the legal battles involved a trustee who did not support his re-election as president. The reason for the battle was because of intentional infliction of emotional distress and was accused for defamation against the trustee. The next battle involved the neighbors in the Marion area who complained about the increased visitor access to the manor. Under his leadership, the foundation reached a financial disarray, which led to the court petition in 2002 or 2004 to break Barnes' trust. Finally, with the duty of obedience, which means that the organization adheres to its mission and complies with applicable laws and regulation and operates in accordance with its bylaws and policies and does not engage in unauthorized activities. The trust states that the collection should remain in Marion, Pennsylvania, and that it is an educationally oriented institution. By moving the collection to Philadelphia, it violated their duty as a board instead of fulfilling Bard's objectives. This leads into donor's intent. Was donor intent honored? The donor's intent, which is the purpose for which a donor provides a gift, explicitly stated intentions and the unspoken expectations for how the funds will be used. Let's look back at the three main points I took from the bylaws. The first one was the gallery was to be solely and exclusively used for educational purposes for students and instructors. In the 1960s, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania ordered the foundation to be open to the public at least twice a week. Most of the visitors were not there to attend classes or had not obtained any permission to be visiting, which went against the bylaw. The second part is the collection would be closed at Barnes' death and no further purchases or bequests and additions, which was in regards to the traveling expeditions. In 1991, the president, Richard Glanton, was going to sell several paintings to raise money for the building. He couldn't because of the large public outcry that occurred, but a year later, a court ruled in favor that 90 paintings could be loaned out for a one-time revenue-generating tour. The third bylaw was that he wished for his art, specifically arranged at his time of his death, to remain that way. Although the new location is able to have most of the collection arranged in a similar manner, the overall feel was lost, as the location is larger and less personal to the viewers. Since the donor intent was not honored, how did the board justify overriding the original mission? Which was through three ways: financial crisis, legal support through the Cypress Doctrine, and an increase to public access. Since it is clearly stated that the donor's intent was not honored, let's lead into why the board justified overriding the original mission. The original mission was overridden by one way through financial crisis, which happened through lengthy court battles that drained the liquid assets of the foundation, the shrinking endowment, and the failed renovations of the Marion location. It also got it through legal support through the Cypress Doctrine, which allows courts to modify the terms of a charitable trust to ensure it aligns with the donor's general intent when the specific purpose becomes impossible or impractical. The Cypress Doctrine was used to avoid the rigid restrictions that were imposed in his charitable trust, and the people that were able to fund this decision were several Philadelphia foundations that were set up by the same high society group that Dr. Barnes had disliked. As mentioned before, that the elite of Philadelphia and him had a mutual distaste for each other. The third part was to increase public access, which would thereby increase the funds that would go into the foundation. This leads into the next part, which is the public-private influence. How did they overturn Albert C. Barnes' will? There was three groups or organizations that were involved in the overturning. One of them is Walter Annenberg, Pew Charitable Trust, and Lenfest Foundation. Walter Annenberg is also the owner of the Philadelphia Inquirer and also the founder for the Annenberg Foundation. It is noted that Barnes argued with the Philadelphia Museum of Art, its director, and Walter Annenberg, who is the owner of Philadelphia Inquirer. And then months after Barnes' death in 1951, Annenberg sued for the collection to be open to the public. Although the lawsuit failed, the Barnes Foundation was forced to keep its doors open for the public 2 days of the week by appointment in 1958. Three charities underwrote the Barnes Foundation in a lawsuit to overturn Dr. Barnes' trust, which restricted the way Barnes paintings can be shown and the size of the board of trustees. The organization will be paying for the foundation's expenses as per the agreement, which is based on how much they wish to move the paintings from the famous artists to the Philadelphia area. It is important to note that the Lincoln University, the first degree granting HBCU, had a long partnership with the Barnes Foundation. The Barnes encouraged Lincoln students to attend classes at the foundation after meeting the then president of the university, Dr. Horace Mann Bond. The original agreement was for the Barnes Foundation Board of Trustees meant that the Lincoln University's Board of Trustees nominated 5 members to the Barnes Foundation. The arrangement showcases Dr. Barnes' distaste for the elite and his commitment to racial equity. In doing so, the trustees argued that moving the collection to downtown Philly would generate more revenue through tourism and grants. In exchange for financial backing, the board expanded the seats from 5 to 15, which diluted Lincoln University's control. Philanthropic money can reshape cultural institutions and override donor intent. In the end, Pew Charitable Trust and Lenfest Foundation benefited the most from the reconstruction and relocation of the Barnes Foundation. They were able to amass reputational gain and financial influence. Reputational gain came from becoming the cultural savior for the foundation's financial crisis. Financially, they were able to not necessarily directly profit from it, but it gave them more leverage in both prestige and power, also in just overall cultural footprint. Brings us to the conclusion of the key takeaways I've learned from the documentary and overall research in the Barnes Foundation, which is having a strong governance, a mission-aligned budget, and the biggest controversy from the entire documentary was how legal can override a will or overall just a donor's intent. Although Barnes had a strong governance structure that reflected well to restrain public influence and wanted that education was more important than public exhibition, when financial issues arose, the original governments lacked the proper tools to actually handle the situation, and then therefore violated his trust, resulting in the courts having to step in and make major decisions that the Board of Trustees should have handled. The next part, which is the mission aligned budget, basically suggesting that had the foundation allowed for better financial planning and not shifted away from the foundation's overall mission, which was to educate, not make it a public museum, then it might have survived longer in the Marion location, especially after the lack of accounting in terms of the reconstruction of the financial institution and getting away from legal battles. Finally, which legal overriding donor intent kind of leads back into the strong governance. Despite the explicit instructions, the board was able to use the CPRE doctrine to override his will, resulting in powerful interest and powerful entities to take over the foundation's mission, especially when the powerful entities were against his overall mission in the first place, especially why he had such strong hatred / dislike towards the Philadelphia elite, who ended up taking over his foundation and having more power in it, especially with the Board of Trustees now having 15, where only 5 of those members are actually still somewhat following the overall mission from the Lincoln University.